There are names that baseball legends do not speak lightly. Not because they are reluctant to offer praise. Not because the culture of professional sport discourages the acknowledgement of greatness in others. But because men who have stood at the absolute summit of this sport, who have hit the home runs and won the championships and collected the hardware that permanently places them in the conversation about the best who ever played, have developed, through decades of elite competition, a finely calibrated sense of what deserves genuine amazement. They have seen everything. Or so they believed. Ken Griffey Jr. has seen everything. A career that defined a generation of baseball, that produced numbers and moments and a swing so beautiful that it became the standard against which all other swings are measured, has given him the full panoramic view of what this sport is capable of producing. David Ortiz has seen everything. Championships. Pressure at-bats in moments where entire cities held their breath. The specific electricity of a postseason home run that changes not just a game but a narrative, a season, a franchise's entire relationship with its own history. These men do not shock easily. And yet, right now, in the baseball world's current conversation, in the group chats and phone calls and social media exchanges between people who have spent their lives inside this sport, there is one name producing reactions that the most decorated legends of the game are struggling to contain within the boundaries of their usual professional composure. Munetaka Murakami. 9 home runs. 4 consecutive games with at least one. A pace and a power and a consistency of damage that has moved beyond the territory of impressive statistical performance into something that forces even the most experienced baseball observers to put down whatever they are doing and simply watch. Griffey's reaction when the 9th home run landed was not the measured, considered response of a Hall of Famer carefully calibrating his public commentary. It was shock. Pure, unfiltered, completely genuine shock from a man who hit 630 home runs in the major leagues and thought he understood everything this sport could show him about what a bat meeting a baseball at the right moment can produce. Big Papi's reaction was the same. And when men like these react that way, when the legends stop analyzing and start simply staring, the baseball world needs to pay attention. Because something extraordinary is happening. And its name is Munetaka Murakami. Stay with us. Because the story behind 9 home runs and 4 consecutive games and the reactions of the men who know this sport most deeply is far more remarkable than any single statistic can capture. For baseball fans outside Japan, Munetaka Murakami is still a relatively new presence in the conversation. Not because his talent is new. Not because his ability to hit a baseball with devastating power and frequency is something that has emerged suddenly or without foundation. But because the geography of baseball, the way the sport's attention has historically concentrated itself in North America while extraordinary things were happening in other baseball cultures around the world, has meant that players like Murakami can spend years performing at levels that would make them household names in any American city without ever fully penetrating the consciousness of the broader baseball public. That is changing. Rapidly. Irreversibly. Because what Murakami is doing right now cannot be contained by geography or language or the historical tendency of American baseball coverage to treat the rest of the world's relationship with the sport as a footnote to the main story. 9 home runs. 4 consecutive games. Numbers that exist in rare company regardless of which league, which country, which era of the sport you choose to measure them against. But to understand why those numbers are producing the reactions they are producing from men like Griffey and Ortiz, why legends who have seen everything are reacting with the unguarded amazement of people seeing something genuinely new, you have to understand who Murakami is beyond the statistics. You have to understand where he came from. What he built. What the journey to 9 home runs in this stretch of games actually represents for a player whose path to this moment has been anything but straightforward. Murakami did not arrive at this moment fully formed. No player does. But the specifics of how Murakami developed, the particular combination of natural ability, environmental challenge, personal setback, and the kind of response to setback that defines careers in ways that smooth success never could, make the current chapter of his story impossible to fully appreciate without understanding the chapters that preceded it. He was identified early as something different. In Japanese baseball, where the identification of elite talent is conducted with a thoroughness and a seriousness that produces consistent results at the highest level, Murakami stood out from the beginning in ways that scouts and coaches recognized immediately. The swing. That is always where the conversation about Murakami begins and where it keeps returning no matter how many other elements of his game are discussed. There is something in the mechanics of how he generates power, the load, the rotation, the extension through contact, the follow-through that suggests a body operating in perfect coordination with an intention that is completely clear, that stops people who understand hitting mechanics the way a musician with perfect pitch stops when they hear something played exactly right. It is not just powerful. It is correct. The kind of swing that coaches spend careers trying to teach and that some players are simply born understanding in a way that instruction can refine but never fully create. But the swing alone did not make Murakami what he is. What the swing needed, what every exceptional physical talent needs before it becomes exceptional performance, was the mental infrastructure to support it. The preparation. The discipline. The willingness to do the work that exists between games, between seasons, between the moments of public brilliance that everyone sees and the private hours of grinding development that nobody does. Murakami built that infrastructure through experience that was not always comfortable. Setbacks that tested whether the talent was accompanied by the character necessary to survive the game's inevitable cruelties. Stretches where the results did not match the ability. Moments where the gap between who he was and who he needed to become felt larger than any single off-season of work could close. He closed it anyway. And what has emerged on the other side of that closing is the player currently hitting home runs in 4 consecutive games and producing reactions from Hall of Famers that the baseball world cannot stop discussing. Let us talk about what has actually happened. Because in the rush to contextualize and analyze and place this stretch within the larger narrative of Murakami's career and the sport's history, it is worth pausing to simply describe what has occurred, game by game, at-bat by at-bat, and let the reality of it land without the cushioning of analysis. Game 1 of the streak. Murakami stepped to the plate in a situation that opposing pitchers had prepared for. The scouting reports existed. The game plans had been constructed. The specific approaches designed to limit what he could do with pitches in certain locations at certain counts had been discussed and agreed upon and implemented. The home run came anyway. Not against a mistake. Not against a pitch that accidentally wandered into a location the pitcher had specifically intended to avoid. Against a pitch that was thrown where it was supposed to be thrown, at the velocity it was supposed to carry, with the movement it was supposed to have. Murakami hit it out. Game 2. Different pitcher. Different approach. The adjustments that pitching staffs make between games, pulling the previous game's data and looking for the pattern that will produce a different result, had been applied. The game plan was new. The intention was to present Murakami with a different problem than the one he had solved the game before. The home run came anyway. Game 3. The conversation among pitching coaches around the league was no longer casual. There were phone calls. There were film sessions that went longer than usual. There was the specific, focused urgency of baseball professionals who are watching something they cannot solve and are running out of conventional solutions to try. The home run came anyway. Game 4. The 9th of the current total. The one that produced the reactions from Griffey and Ortiz that the baseball world is still processing. This home run was different from the others not in its physical dimensions but in its context. Because by Game 4, every pitcher who took the mound against Murakami knew exactly what they were facing. There was no information advantage available to them. No scouting report detail that hadn't been studied, no approach that hadn't been considered, no pitch location or sequence that hadn't been discussed in the context of finding a way to prevent exactly what they were all trying to prevent. And still, the ball left the park with a trajectory and a distance and a sound that silenced stadiums the way only the most authoritative contact between bat and baseball can silence them, completely, immediately, with the specific quality of quiet that crowds produce when they have just witnessed something they did not fully believe was possible until they saw it with their own eyes. Ken Griffey Jr. does not perform amazement. This is important to understand before discussing his reaction to Murakami's ninth home run. Griffey has spent his post-playing career conducting himself with the ease of a man who has earned the right to be comfortable in every baseball environment, who has seen enough, done enough, and knows enough that the gap between his experience and anything the current game can show him is, in his own estimation, essentially closed. He has watched great players hit great home runs. He has been in rooms with the most celebrated power hitters of multiple generations and discussed the craft of hitting with the shared vocabulary of people who have lived it at the highest level. He has assessed talent with the calibrated eye of someone whose own talent was historically exceptional. And then he watched Murakami's ninth home run. The reaction that followed was not processed through any of those filters. It bypassed the assessment and the calibration and the professional composure and produced something that people in Griffey's presence described as unguarded. The kind of reaction that only happens when something exceeds not just expectations but the framework within which expectations are formed. He reportedly watched the replay immediately. Then watched it again. Then said something that the people present described as the kind of statement a great player makes when they recognize something in another player that they recognize from their own best moments, the specific shock of seeing your own internal standard for what hitting can be exceeded by someone else. What he said was brief, direct, and it left no room for the interpretive ambiguity that sports commentary sometimes produces. He simply said Murakami was different. Not different from current players. Different from everyone. David Ortiz processes baseball through emotion first and analysis second. This is not a criticism. It is a description of the specific quality that made him one of the most beloved players of his generation, the ability to feel what a moment means before he can explain why it means it, to react with a human authenticity that his enormous personality amplifies rather than performs. His response to Murakami's four-game stretch was consistent with everything that defines how Ortiz engages with the sport he loves. He was loud about it. Not in the way that manufactured reactions are loud, with the performed enthusiasm of someone trying to generate attention. But in the genuine, infectious way that Ortiz has always been loud about things that move him. The kind of loudness that draws people in rather than pushing them away because it is clearly coming from a real place. He talked about the swing first. Always the swing. Because for hitters who have spent their careers inside the craft of hitting, the swing is the primary language, the first thing they look at, the thing that tells them everything they need to know about what a hitter is and what a hitter is capable of before any statistics are consulted. Murakami's swing, Ortiz said, was the kind of swing that makes a hitting coach want to show it to every young player they will ever work with. Not to copy it, but to understand it. To see what it looks like when everything, the load, the rotation, the decision-making, the intention, exists in perfect alignment. Then he talked about the consistency. 4 games. 4 consecutive games with home runs. Against pitching that knew exactly what it was trying to prevent. Against game plans constructed specifically around the mission of not allowing what kept happening anyway. Ortiz, who hit home runs in the most pressure-filled moments of the most scrutinized postseason games of his era, understood what that consistency required. And he said so. Loudly. Completely. Without the hedging that careful public figures sometimes deploy when discussing players whose full story they don't yet know. He said Murakami was special. And when Big Papi says special, with that voice, with that history, with the full weight of what his own career earned him the right to say, the baseball world listens. Here is the larger question that Murakami's 9 home runs and 4 consecutive games are forcing into the baseball conversation. What does the sport do with a talent that arrives from outside its traditional center and performs at a level that its most celebrated legends cannot watch without dropping their composure? Baseball has always been international. Its roots extend across cultures and countries and languages in ways that the sport's American-centric mythology sometimes obscures. Players from across the world have always contributed to the game's highest levels, have won championships, broken records, changed how the sport understands itself and its own possibilities. But there is a difference between international contribution and international redefinition. Murakami is not simply contributing to the conversation about who the sport's best players are. He is redefining the terms of that conversation. Forcing a reassessment of assumptions, about where power hitters come from, about what preparation systems produce the most complete offensive players, about whether the frameworks American baseball has developed for identifying and developing elite talent are as comprehensive as the sport has assumed them to be. Griffey's shock and Ortiz's loudness are not just personal reactions to an impressive stretch of games. They are the sport's most credentialed voices acknowledging, in real time, that something is happening that their existing frameworks did not fully anticipate. That acknowledgement matters. Because it signals not just respect for Murakami specifically but a genuine opening, a willingness from within the sport's established hierarchy to recognize that greatness is arriving from places and informs that the sport's historical imagination did not always make room for. Murakami is walking through that opening. 9 home runs at a time. 9 home runs. The number sits in the baseball world's consciousness right now with the specific weight of something that everyone can see is not finished. That is still building. That has the quality of a thing in motion, gathering momentum, adding evidence, constructing the case for a reassessment of what is possible with each new game that adds to the total. Griffey is watching. Ortiz is talking. The legends who built their reputations on understanding this sport more deeply than anyone else are paying the kind of attention that elite competitors reserve for the rare occasions when something genuinely exceeds their expectations. And Murakami is preparing for his next at-bat. With the same approach that produced the 9. With the same swing that stopped Griffey mid-sentence and made Ortiz reach for superlatives he normally reserves for the players whose names are already permanently written into the sport's history. The preparation is not complicated. It is not mysterious. It is the same thing that has always produced greatness in baseball, the quiet, relentless, daily commitment to being ready for whatever the next pitcher brings. To studying. To adjusting. To walking to the plate with a clarity of purpose that opposing pitching staffs have spent 4 consecutive games trying to disrupt and have not yet found a way to reach. The legends are shocked because they have seen everything. Murakami is not finished showing them things they haven't seen. 9 is a number. What comes after 9 is a statement. And the baseball world, from the Hall of Famers watching in amazement to the pitching staffs preparing their next attempt at a solution, is waiting to find out exactly how loud that statement gets.